So we met at Top Drawer in September in the autumn, and we
Yeah.
kind of got into this really interesting conversation about one of the trends in particular. But first, can you tell me a bit more about like the Better Trends company and the work you do and who you do it for?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a values-led, female-founded, mainly female, non-binary led company, a creative agency who specialize in a niche that we felt was really important for companies, which is the concept, the trend forecasting, and the strategizing around that, and linking it with the design direction, which doesn't seem to happen that much, and we feel like it really should. So we are pretty small, we're boutique, and we're really agile, and we are purposeful in what we do. So it's not about, which is another reason why Natalie and I came together, is most of our work before this, we're fairly new, we've been going 2 and a bit years, and most of our work was corporate by nature, with big companies with big budgets who could choose to not implement the work you did, could also just sit in a drawer and there's a tick box. And so we felt like a lot of the purposeful, eco-aware, social justice elements of our work were not getting listened to. And on the other side of it, there were SMEs crying out for, advice, help, access. And so, yes, Natalie and I met in 2020. And when I was doing a forecasting talk at Top Drawer, Natalie has an amazing self-illustrated, beautiful design company herself. And we just got talking about why SMEs miss out when they are the ones that we feel make the most positive impact at retail and are the most community-led, social justice, eco-aware. So all of those things combined together to create this perfect storm, and here we are.
Awesome. So that's mad that you're only 2 years old in this business because you've got this great partnership with Top Drawer. And I always like seeing your stands there. I mean, I say always. It was the first time when I met you was when I'd seen it first, but now it's something I look out for. And this year was really beautiful as well. So, in terms of the work you did, were you always working in the trend and prediction space?
Yeah, so that's my background is really visual communication and creative strategy around that. So I actually started in my 20s as a fashion stylist, and I was working for Condé Nast Publications. I was a contributing editor for GQ magazine. I worked for Vogue, Harper's and Queen, lots of magazine titles that did huge budget productions. But I learned very quickly after graduating in my fashion degree from St. Martin's how to sort of communicate those elitist languages in a way to create really compelling stories. And I sort of naturally moved into forecasting. I was working with record labels. We worked with Mark Ronson on his Version album and tour and the sort of visual identity of what him and his team looked like. So yeah, I did a lot of forecasting naturally. And then after quite a long time doing styling, I moved into more brand comms, forecasting, trend work, and worked for lots of different agencies. I've worked for WGSN, I've consulted for stylists. So those kind of big guys that do amazing work, but they're not always accessible to smaller companies and people that want that information. So I've worked both client side across retail and lifestyle spaces as a trend forecaster, as someone who really creates the conceptual ideas that are underpinned by the consumer attitude. So a lot of qualitative research too. And then, yeah, I've just been in that space for quite a long time now.
I don't know how you fit it all in, honestly. There's like four grids. But no, that's so mad. And it's so interesting that you said that you started in that sort of fashion magazine world, because obviously the word trends, that's where a lot of people would associate it. And that's, I remember, I mean, I was such a fashion magazine girl growing up. I think we all were of our generation pre-internet. And, it would be like, oh, green is having a moment. And then it would have a really satisfying spread with all the green items that are in the high street. But it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because when we use the word trend, um, sometimes from fashion, it can feel a bit like somebody's decided something, so everyone copies it and has to, just jump on board. Jumping on a trend has a bad rap. But this is a bit more about, monitoring and sensing the mood of people, isn't it? And so, can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, and anyone that's ever seen me talk about trends knows I have a huge bugbear about, I suppose, the word and the associations, exactly as you say, Cara. It's got such bad connotations in terms of hyperconsumption. And that's
Mm,
gone from, like you say, magazines forecasting certain things that are trendy and everyone needs to suddenly go and buy green, whatever,
mm,
to colour of the year now really doing that in itself. There's lots of different companies that forecast lots of different colours of the year. And it feels like a scramble to always, I suppose, uncover what that could be. And then, of course, we've got TikTok and we've got everything constantly evolving and rotating and being named a different core or a different aesthetic. Mob wife aesthetic is something that we've got at the moment.
that is the
And
newest one, isn't it? Or at least I've caught up with it finally. It might not be the newest one, but I have been seeing that.
yeah,
Yeah, that,
so though it's not like anything is new or inherently bad about those micro trends, but I do think they put external pressure on companies who perhaps don't understand the genesis or the work that goes into actually researching trends. We have a really rigorous research methodology that I've formed over 15 years of doing this. I also teach these frameworks and these forecasting methods at University of the Arts London, where I lecture, and I also teach at different online schools. And it's something that takes a lot of time. So anyone that says it's just a feeling, isn't it? You can kind of pick them out. No, it's underpinned by so much. And that's why I get really frustrated with when someone just associates a trend with, oh, TikTok, whatever is a trend. Oh, this is a trend.
yeah.
They are and they aren't. And I think you have to understand the bigger picture for it to apply to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say that about TikTok because obviously the word trending is a word that feels really deeply connected with social media. And it
Mm.
has, even if we talk about trending audio, it's this idea of it having a really short life. But then it kind of feels like that breeds one hit wonder if you're looking from a product business or a, retail point of view, the Stanley Cup or whatever, things like that. It's like, it's not actually creating long-term brand value and trust and loyalty. It's just a sort of it item that can spawn spin-offs that don't really stand for anything. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny how much of our day to day now is governed by all these things, as you say, all the cottage core and norm core and mob wife things. It's just really interesting. And so, one of the conversations that we got really into when I met you was the idea of, what's been going on in the world has been basically, really layered and challenging for people, and how that's kind of led to some of the trends that you have in your report. So yeah, tell me a bit more about how you think that COVID, post-COVID, the difficult financial times that we've been having have kind of led to the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, we had a really long conversation, didn't we? So I'll try and.
I could have stayed there all day, honestly. That's why I was so desperate to speak to you again. I thought we were really, yeah.
um, yeah, this really, I suppose, to contextualize it, it really feeds back into what we just said before. So you have these layers, and this is something actually which I'm going to publish quite soon as a trend method that anyone can follow. So I'm really excited about what's coming up in Better Trends in terms of I'm starting to share some of these things that people find really useful in terms of visualizing and understanding trends. But for now, I'll just use my hands. And there's basically layers of micro, TikToks, colors, the stuff down here that everyone really focuses on. And that's the hype to an extent. It's also the output, which is absolutely valid. So it's not that I don't think any of the stuff I've just said is valid. It's just that on top of it are all these other layers, kind of like umbrellaed underneath each other, almost like a Wi-Fi signal. And if you think about all the other layers, whether it's industry and category, social trends, and then right at the top, you've got these huge macro trends, which is basically what you've just asked, what's going on in the world? And people probably hear the words trend drivers or pestle forces or macros or any of those words basically means what is changing in society that is making us behave in certain ways. And those things are, at the moment, really in flux, really fluid. There's a lot of uncertainty post-COVID. And that obviously covers everything from war to the economy to politics and much more. But those things aren't stable. And so they are creating certain behaviors and consumer attitudes that we're seeing. And that's really where we take our research, at the top level, and it filters all the way down through category, industry, society, into product, marketing, comms, and other outputs.
Great.
So,
No, that totally makes sense. And I think it's one of those things that the work you do gives you that wider lens to see things in a way that we probably wouldn't until several decades after otherwise, and just kind of work out, oh, that probably informed that, Um, so one of your macro trends for the year or for the next few years for this period is the no-cation, which I immediately loved because I think it was because it spoke to something I'd noticed as well, of this idea of actually celebrating the little things. And yeah, can you talk to me about why you think that started to come about when it did, and how that distills into the sub trends that you have for this year?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was great to see you suddenly just hone in on that. And I think lots of people are feeling similar, like, oh, I really get this. Sometimes we try and make trends accessible, which is why we've had this amazing partnership with Top Drawer, which is why we've been so grateful to have the space where people can pick up stuff and interact and understand which colors sit with what and what their assortments could look like. So we do try and make it understandable. It doesn't mean it always is relevant for everyone, but you definitely were like, yes, okay, I get it. And the occasion, we wanted to visualize it, even though it is a huge macro trend in terms of consumer behavior, but also try and pull it together because those bigger trends can sometimes seem abstract or amorphous to some people. So everything that I mentioned before, the fluidity, the ambiguity, the uncertainty that we're facing in our lives post-COVID is really forcing some different types of behavior. And a huge element that we've noticed is there's so much going on in the world that we just need to find the good stuff to celebrate. And that doesn't mean necessarily waiting for perfection. I think that's been such a problem in our society. And that's something that, again, as a values sort of purpose-led company, we don't want to ever instill that you must reach this level before you may feel like you are worthy. And I think we're seeing a backlash of that with ageism related elements. We're seeing midlife women really come into their own and hit back against the ageism in media. We're seeing people really reject some of the overarching wellness crusaders that have been permeating our feeds and our brains for some time now, and not having to feel like we have to do everything all the time. We've seen a backlash in society through quiet quitting, those sort of, the grand resignation and those elements that we've seen definitely across the Western world, but also in Asia, where there are trends that are translated into English, the lying down trend. Again, this sort of resignation in a way of like, I don't have to be productive all the time. I don't have to do all these things and better myself all the time. I just need to live in the moment. There's so much uncertainty going on in the world, and people are going through horrible, horrific things. What can I find good about today? And that's the big stuff. And what it filters down into is celebrations of no occasion, hence our coming up with that word. You don't have to have a birthday, you don't have to get married. You can just say, you know what, I got through the day. And we're seeing that come alive in such brilliant graphics. We Are Proper Good does amazing stuff.
I love her
We've
stuff.
I may have bought quite a few prints
Well,
myself after
I don't.
Top
You can't really see because I've got the blur on, but I already have a big gallery wall. So we're only in a small flat, so I have to be very strict about.
Drawer.
But I can't wait to have a kitchen big enough to put some food ones in. Actually,
I
so
did get, yeah, the really big one. And I got one for my best friend too, of chatting shit, drinking wine. So if anyone's seen me do a talk, I mention that a lot because I think it just is, whether or not you drink, it doesn't really matter. It's the mood of just, being with your bestie, enjoying something you love, and that moment, you want to celebrate that because it's been really hard to catch up with people IRL. It's been really hard to connect and create community. And we're seeing it come through in all sorts of different ways. Like I said, obviously the design, the graphics, we're seeing beautiful, really, really unique hand-drawn elements, hand typography, amusing sayings, cheeky, irreverence.
mm.
But we're seeing it come through in other categories like food, for instance, which is something that you mentioned. It's our newer sub-trend. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so interesting. I actually saw something the other day about how fashion is now getting more informed by restaurants and their merch, and it felt really connected. It's only as you say it, I'm thinking, but it felt really connected to this because it sort of was that no occasion of why not have a fried egg on your hoodie? Why not, have a t-shirt that has a noodle bar on it? But it's interesting. Tell me, so it's so interesting what you were saying about the irreverence of as kind of undercurrent of this, because I don't know if I'd sort of really picked up on that as much as the being present with each other and really savoring those moments. But I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, I've seen a lot of the cheekiness. I was recently doing an edit of my favorite Valentine's and Galentine's Day cards, and always the ones that spoke to me, the ones that had some sort of more specific insight rather than more generic. That cheekiness was popular as well in the ones that I shared. But in terms of that chatting shit and drinking wine, that was very much similar to a theme that I saw in some of the cards as well. Um, why food? Why do you think food has got this appeal to us that it feels relevant for this?
I think there's um, so many bigger forces that are driving us towards that. And if you think about all the things that food represents, so in our current no occasion report, I say current, it's been hugely popular. So we're actually going to, I think we might do an iteration every year of just different updates. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to receive DMs on that. But there's definitely something about that need to connect with people. And you can go back into anthropological, essays and theorists about what food does. It brings you together. It creates community. It's a space for sharing. It's a space for familial, whether it's your chosen family or your blood family. It's that bonding time. There's lots of traditions around food and rituals, and is is all of that kind of stuff. And of course, food is also, as anyone who's watched any kind of food-based TV recently, it's also very sensual.
Mm.
And I think in terms of connecting either in a platonic way or a romantic way or a sensual way, food has a part to play in all of those spaces where we really crave human connection IRL in a physical space.
Mm. And there's that idea of possibly speculating here, but from what you were saying about that wellness culture, toxic well-being culture, and depriving oneself and almost sticking two fingers up at that and being like, no, I'm going to have cake, and this sort of seeking pleasure rather than just the purpose of it. It's more than just food for function, is it? It's not just I'll eat so that I live. It's a celebration of the fanciful and the special.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really lovely way of putting it, fanciful. Why shouldn't we have, a really beautiful sort of boutique bespoke donut from the most amazing bakery? And there's so many great places that are really creating these artisanal things that people will speak out. It's proper social media fodder. But at the same time, I think it goes to show it's not just a retail space, it's an experience. And it's a really human experience. Like you say, it's really pleasurable. It's visceral. So of course we can watch people going to a gallery or going to an immersive ball pit or whatever exhibition, and they can put it on their socials. But when you see someone eating this huge cream cake, it's so visceral because that feeling, and it will might evoke negative connotations for you, but it's evocative. And I think that's what people are really getting into. That feeling of eating cake, of drinking something with a friend, of eating cheese, whatever it is that that smell of coffee in the morning. And that's why we're seeing this absolute, huge, diverse lifestyle growth of acknowledgement of that in these spaces. That, why is there a picture or saying about food when you can eat food? I think it's these little reminders, and it's the humanity of it. That's really what it is.
And it feels really playful as well. Like it's just a lighter way of doing things. And as you say, amongst a kind of heavy backdrop of uncertainty and difficult times, that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's completely it. It's really important. There's one of our sections in the No Occasion report. It's a very big report with 4 different sections, and it runs from sort of very sensitive, mindful-esque kind of ideas, all the way through to food, all the way through to optimistic nihilism, which of course we've seen explode as a sort of hashtag recently, where people are saying, yeah, I don't care. That irreverence is coming in. It's like, if the world is that bad, then I'm just going to enjoy myself.
Yeah.
Why am I depriving myself? Why am I counting calories or whatever it is? Why am I working really hard and not going out and seeing my friends and having fun? So I think there is that element to it of just hedonism and just enjoyment. And if there's not that much to look forward to, let's live in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And is there a generational split with this? Is it affecting most consumers, or is it more the younger ones or anything like that?
I think there is a perception of a lot of this being for younger people, and I think there are certain elements that it is. I definitely think that sort of hedonistic, that nihilistic element where we have main character syndrome, or that sort of slightly, what era are you in? Are you in your evil era? And that sort of, I'm going to behave how I want to behave. We're seeing that explode on social media of like, what does it matter, and how can I embrace my innermost sort of self?
Yeah.
Just do that in a really, really way that challenges society or what's expected of me.
Yeah.
So I think it's more that. I think it's half that we are seeing a younger generation that have really, really bleak prospects. They don't have the opportunities that a lot of older generations were afforded. At the same time, there is a lot of inequity across many, many spaces, across generations, for people that don't have the privileges that is afforded to many others in their generations, regardless of the generation. So I think we are seeing, for instance, females and other minority peoples who have been disadvantaged holding on to some of these exciting spaces and reclaiming them and getting them really positively for themselves, for their loved ones, for their friends. And yeah, it's really great to see. It's these micro moments of joy and holding on to that in quite a grey world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I mean, do we want to touch just quickly on a couple of the other little trends, just very briefly, and how they feed into things? So I know that you've got so I'll just talk about this the sub trends that you have for this year. So you have also the summer solstice and the Mediterranean, the sunset haze.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are really interesting. So there's the solstice one with its based all in the idea of like botanicals and natural things, herbs and mythology and spirituality. Do you think, is that something that has been growing over a number of years, or does that feel relatively new?
It's again, it feels like there's a perfect storm come together of lots of these threads that have been ongoing for, again, the macro ideas of neo spirituality, interest in traditional sort of folkloric elements, the interest in obviously rewilding. Those things aren't new, but they're driving different narratives. And I think we're seeing, along with the really sort of different poles of gender inequality and right-wing narratives that are going on when we talk about gender. And, particularly in America, we're seeing really divisive conversations going on. So I think that idea of going back to sort of neo-paganist ideas, going back to old spirituality, which was much more in touch with the earth, with ideas of nature, with ideas of the feminine, not necessarily talking about gender binaries, but of the feminine as a concept, no matter who you were, and really worshipping that, actually. So there's really great feminist ideas that feel quite new coming through, of picking up on those, if we think in a really big way, those ideas of Donna Haraway, those ideas of sort of feminism that was related to the earth. And we saw that recently in Re Sisters. That was that great show at the Barbican, all about ecofeminism. So we can see it coming through in that way. We can see ideas of herbalism, sort of growing your own, Herbu, great brand, that are really elevating the design around this. It feels elevated and beautiful. It doesn't feel hippie, or that sort of idea that only certain people who are gardeners can only do this. It's something that is really coming into our everyday.
Yeah.
So alongside that, our interest in tarot, our interest in different types of spirituality, astrology, it's not going away. It's growing, if anything, in terms of a constant that we can hold on to understand ourselves in a world where we do not trust other authorities. So we're looking back, and all these things are coming together to create these ideas. And summer solstice is a manifestation of these big ideas in that sort of product for spring going forward, and we see that as something evolving.
Okay, great. And in terms of the color palette, because you create a color palette for each one of these in your seasonal reports, and is that just for spring summer 2024? Can you tell me a bit more about how you've come to that palette?
Yeah, again, these are things that, so when we do our design direction, we build on year by year. There's never ever a point where a trend comes and suddenly vanishes, it's not deleted and now we're on to the next one. Everything evolves, and that's something we feel really strongly about at Better Trends Company, that the same way ideas don't just come one day and vanish the next, neither do trends, because trends are about people, and we show that in what we manifest, i.e. not as in a spiritual way, although also that, but in what do we produce. So all the products that we make and that are created by wonderful, amazing creatives, they are a response to something. So yeah, that's a really roundabout way of saying no, they evolve. So we always build on palettes. This time we looked at what feels fresh for this year, what feelings are coming through, and there's definitely a lot of wildflower inspiration that we've seen and tracked from everything from Chelsea Flower Show to our favorite florists, the emergence of beautiful dried flower designs that are coming, hugely into the mainstream from something that was quite sidelined. And we've seen this really merge with that interest in folklore, with herbology, with medicinal elements as well, and of course mushrooms, all those ideas that are still super, super relevant culturally, socially, and in a product way too. So we built on that, and you'll see that in the palette.
And as you say, that just sort of evolves all the time, those trends. Like there would have been a time where tarot cards, it was quite more in your face. Like if they were doing it, it was very kitsch, or with the mushrooms, you know, it was very, again, kitsch and red and white and cartoony. And this one, it's much more natural looking and botanical references. No, that's really interesting. And then on the kind of other end of the spectrum, so it was interesting to hear how that one ties in as well. Again, a kind of search for grounding and direction in a confusing world. So with Sunset Haze, is it escapism that's powering that one?
It feels like there is, yeah. Whereas summer solstice is grounding, and like you say, it's got a lot of craft to it in terms of water coloration of lines, and it feels flowing. The hedonistic escapism that I spoke to earlier in No Occasion, you can definitely see that coming through in Sunset Haze. There's a little bit of we want to party. It's got Ibiza vibes. It's got retro vibes. We've seen the 70s. Again, it's an evolution of that 70s vibe that has been around for quite a few years now. And it feels like a huge evolution in terms of space rather than fashion. So we've seen that in the fashion world, and we've seen that evolve through menswear, women's wear, into print and pattern hugely. But apart from the novelty print and pattern, it's not really been about the home as much. And this is really about environment, tablescapes that are just evolving and just going into, you know, even more beautiful, even more intricate, even more stylized for mood. It really is about creating the mood through the design of the environment, which is the home, or you know, your beach house that you may have. But it feels very Ibiza, feels very Marrakesh circa sort of late 60s, 70s, Rolling Stones, the Gettys. If you don't know any of those visual references, look them up because they're beautiful. It's
I
very
am going to.
hazy.
I have to say, as you're speaking to me about it, I'm completely bought in. At the show, I already liked the little evil eye ceramics. I think they were candles or something like
Yeah.
that. And I saw that, and I thought, oh, I've always, you know, personally liked that kind of blue, white, Greek thing, and I like hand painted ceramics. But now you're completely selling me in, and I just wish I had a room that I could paint like coral and put some beautiful yeah.
Everyone loved that coral. Yeah, it was quite a bold move to paint the whole thing coral.
I think it's really uplifting, isn't it? Because I
Mm,
think that is a color, it's well, with dopamine dressing and all of that, you know, that we were saying
yeah.
before as well. It's that color. Obviously, we both work in the world of color from different points of view. And so I'm always working with color, and it's my belief that I don't believe that any one color has an intrinsic message. I think it's completely contextual. So I don't think that red can't be calm. I'm sure that we could find a way to make it so if we really wanted. And it might be harder because it's such a hot color, but there is something about that coral with as you said, in contrast to the solstice, which is all subdued and soft tones. This is actually very high saturation, very you know, and those things are quite energizing to us to look at. So that makes sense why it kind of feels very joyful. And there's such an interesting overlap between all of them as you speak out. It must be impossible to separate them out like this, because as we're having this conversation, I can see the behaviors just overlapping and intertwining with each other.
Yeah, I think that's something as well that's really important for us to acknowledge and I guess educate people as well on that nothing exists in a silo.
Yeah.
And I think that's also been trends downfall for so long. Like you have this or this or this or that, you know, you have all these specific one things. And obviously everything's interlinked. It doesn't mean that you can't like or relate to lots of different things. You're being influenced by so much at one point, you know, all of us are, and we all have different likes, dislikes, needs, attitudes, anything. So, of course, it's really all about your audience. And that is what I would always say. Perhaps, you know, we've had lots of people turn up and say, oh, no, I wouldn't have that. Of course, you wouldn't have all of them. No, nobody should have absolutely every trend in their space or react to every trend in their product assortment or their designs. It really is about who is your customer? What are their needs and wants and behaviors right now? What's impacting them? If you are not your customer, some people create brands specifically around them. And so
Mm.
they know them perhaps a bit more than someone who is a larger company who may not directly relate to their customer. You've got to do the research. You've got
Mm.
to understand your customer. If you don't, and you're just picking stuff from an aesthetic point of view or from something that you like or perhaps your buyers like, then it probably won't resonate as much. And of course, people will buy things for an aesthetic value, but if you actually relate, then you're going to get a loyal customer.
Absolutely. Wow. I was going to ask you sort of how small businesses can apply this, but I think you've somewhat answered it there. Then perhaps thinking about their audience and then seeing what applies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, do you have any particular tips on that, on how small businesses might be able to kind of use this guidance to inform their businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to always throw the audience thing at some point because we have so many brands that we consult with. And lots of them, especially if you're new, which is fine and expected, you're not going to have that internal data. You're probably making a guesstimate. But as soon as you can really try and understand your audience and where your sales are coming from, then it gives you an advantage. That really does help you solidify, okay, so what does this customer need? What does this customer want? How can I perhaps test something? Or do I need to expand my customer base and think about expanding my portfolio? And how do I do that? So, what other attitudes are really important? And that's why, I'm always doing sort of levels of
Mhm.
what's happening then in your category, what are other people doing? Um, in a sort of competitive way, you have to understand where you're positioned in the market in relation to everyone else, what your offer is, and what's your USP. And therefore, what kind of design direction do you need for your company and your brand? And how does that all align? How do your values all align? That's so important. And so if you do visit our trend stands at Home and Gift or Top Drawer, come and talk to us and just ask more about the trends because we love, as you can tell, I love to talk about them. And it's really important that you, as a brand and as a business or designer, know what should fit your values and your vision. And trying everything at once is just a recipe for disaster because there's so many trends. And I do feel that one piece of advice, going back to what we said earlier, would just be don't be influenced. As much as I love trends, don't be influenced by trends. Don't
Mhm.
suddenly feel the need to do a TikTok something because everyone else is doing it. Does it fit with your branding, with your profile, with your audience? And trends is such a strange one. It's like the word sustainability. What does it really mean? I think that's also really hard. So unless you feel super confident in dabbling with TikTok trends and these other elements, different color trends, then just stick to what you're really confident with and basically look to experts. Give us a call. We're happy to have a coffee chat, free of charge. We'll give you a little bit of a download. And I think it's that confidence which people lack, and sometimes they can chase trends or the color of the year. All of a sudden, you've got a whole assortment that's peach fuzz, and you don't really need that. Let's face it, and it's just going to affect your perception, going to affect your margins, and it's going to affect, yeah, your business as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There's no point just creating products just to jump on bandwagons, and it's got to make sense for your business. And from a brand point of view as well, don't go switching up your messaging just to be, really playful one day and informal, and then, you know, everything, something different the next. It's about kind of having confidence in your brand. But I think it's so interesting, and I'm very interested in all the work you do, and I love all the reports that I've got, and I'll definitely make sure I come and see you speak again. But I think it's so interesting to kind of look at, as you say, audience is key. What is really happening for them? What's going on behind the scenes? And that you can anticipate, because they're not going to tell you, oh, I don't just want a leaflet saying thank you for my order, but it's going to make me smile if it actually feels personal or something like that. But it's about anticipating those things. And I don't, for me, something that's come through has been about the humanity, the messaging, and the fact that an acknowledgement of the fact that we are in a time of uncertainty, to kind of use those other things that we have as people, as humans, to connect with each other, that, you know, can really be quite powerful for brands.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great kind of synopsis, Cara, of the need for a brand to understand and create community.
Yeah.
And obviously there's no one way of doing it, but one huge trend, one mega trend is about, connection, human connection in the age of digital loneliness. So how can you make that happen? And it's going to be a slightly different answer for everyone, but there's definitely challenges there for every business that they can work on and create their own unique sense of what that looks like for them. And that is authentic, even though that word has been overused, but there's a sort of transparency, there's an honesty about doing that, which is well received, I think, right now, and much related to.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Louise.
Well, thank you. It's been great chatting. Lovely to see you again.